I'm 24, and 2 weeks ago, I caught my boyfriend of almost 4 years in a situation I can't stop replaying in my head. It's one of those moments where your brain tells you something's wrong, but you still stand there for a second, frozen, because the reality doesn't click right away. It started on a random Thursday. He told me he was going to help his old family friend paint her new apartment. I didn't think much of it. He's handy, and I've always trusted him. He left early in the morning with a bag of tools, kissed me goodbye, and promised he'd be back by dinner. By 8 p.m., there was no sign of him. No texts, no calls. I'd sent a couple of messages throughout the day, just normal check-ins, but all I got was a single reply hours later saying they were almost done. At 9:30, I gave up waiting and heated leftovers for myself, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. Then, around 10, I heard the distinct sound of his truck pull the driveway. Relief hit for half a second, but when I looked out the window, I saw he wasn't alone. A woman got out of the passenger side, laughing, holding his hoodie like it was hers. She wasn't just anyone, she was his ex, the one he swore he hadn't spoken to in over 2 years. And the worst part? Neither of them saw me watching. I didn't go outside right away. I stood there in the dark kitchen, peeking through the blinds like some neighbor spying for gossip, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. They were still in the driveway, talking. She was holding his hoodie tight around herself like it was some kind of prize. It wasn't just casual conversation. They were leaning in close, faces too near for comfort. Every time she laughed, she'd reach out and touch his arm, and he didn't pull away. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I didn't need to. The body language was enough to make my stomach turn. After a few minutes, he finally grabbed her overnight bag from the back seat. Overnight bag. That's when my chest went cold. She wasn't just visiting. She was staying somewhere. My somewhere. They started walking toward the front door like it was completely normal. That was the moment I snapped out of my frozen state. I flicked on every light in the living room and stood right in the entryway, arms crossed, waiting. When they stepped inside, he froze like a kid caught stealing. She, on the other hand, had the audacity to smile at me, mumble a quick, "Hey," and stroll right past me toward the guest room, like she lived here, like I didn't even matter. I didn't say a word. I just stared at him, waiting for some explanation that wouldn't make me lose my mind. What came out of his mouth next didn't make it better. It made it worse. He didn't even start with an apology. "No, this isn't what it looks like," or, "Let me explain." The first words out of his mouth were, "She's just staying here for a few days." Like that sentence was supposed to be the magic cure for my rising fury. I asked him why she couldn't stay literally anywhere else. Friends, family, even a motel. He avoided eye contact, mumbling something about her having a rough time and needing a safe place. According to him, she'd just broken up with her boyfriend, lost her apartment, and didn't have anyone else to turn to. And apparently, without mentioning a word to me, he decided our home would be the solution. I could feel my face getting hot, my pulse hammering. I reminded him that this wasn't just his place. This was mine, too. That any decision about who stayed here should involve both of us. He just shrugged like I was being dramatic, said it was no big deal and temporary. The thing that got me the most was how casual he was about it. He spoke like she was some harmless stranger, not the ex he used to cry over when they broke up. Not the same woman whose name I once saw pop up on his phone late first started dating. Back then, he'd sworn it was nothing, that they'd stopped talking completely. Now, here she was, sleeping under the same roof as us, wearing his hoodie. I told him flat out I wasn't comfortable with it, that I didn't want her here. He just kept repeating that I was overreacting. And then, the part that really made my jaw drop, he said I should be proud of him for helping someone in need. Like my feelings didn't matter because he was playing hero. When I asked why he didn't tell me about any of this before showing up with her at 10 p.m., his only answer was, "I knew you'd say no." That's when I realized he wasn't clueless. He knew what he was doing would upset me. He just decided my opinion wasn't worth considering. I went to bed that night, not because I was tired, but because I didn't trust myself to keep talking without screaming. I lay there in the dark, listening to the faint sound of their voices down the hall. Every laugh from her felt like a slap. And just when I thought I'd heard enough to last a lifetime, the sound that came next made my blood run cold. It was his bedroom door, and it wasn't our room. At first I thought maybe I was imagining houses settle, doors creak. My mind could have been inventing the sound because I was already worked up. But then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, followed by a low murmur of voices. I strained to make out the words, holding my breath so I wouldn't miss anything. His voice was softer than I'd ever heard it, almost like the way he used to talk to me in those first few months we were together, when every conversation was sugar-coated. Hers was quieter, but she laughed again. That same fake little giggle I'd heard in the driveway. The footsteps stopped. I pictured them standing in the hallway, close enough to touch. A moment later, another door closed. This time, I knew exactly which one. It was the guest room. I told myself they were just saying goodnight, that he was being polite, making sure she settled in. But the longer I lay there, the more I thought about how quickly a good night could turn into something else when the person is an ex you haven't spoken to in years. Sleep didn't happen for me that night. Every creak in the house, Every faint hum of conversation from down the hall had me wide awake, staring into the dark. Around 3 a.m., I heard him finally come into our room. He slid into bed like nothing was wrong, facing away from me. He didn't touch me, didn't say a word. By morning, I was running on 2 hours of restless sleep and a head full of questions I didn't want to know the answers to. He acted like nothing had happened, asked if I wanted coffee, chatted about the weather, even kissed my cheek before heading to the shower. Meanwhile, she was already in the kitchen when I came out, barefoot, wearing his sweatpants now. She smiled like we were girlfriends having brunch and asked if I wanted eggs. I told her no. My voice was flat enough she finally looked a little uncomfortable. While the coffee brewed, I pretended to scroll on my phone, but really, I was watching the reflection in the microwave door. Every move she made in my kitchen felt invasive, using my favorite mug, humming to herself, moving around like she owned the place. That's when I decided I wasn't going to just sit here waiting for the next insult. I was going to find out exactly what was going on between them, and I already knew the first person who'd be able to tell me. I grabbed my keys and left without telling either of them where I was going. The second I was out of the driveway, I called Kayla, my oldest friend, and, more importantly, someone who went to high school with both my boyfriend and his ex. If there was dirt to dig up, Kayla was the one with the shovel. She picked up on the second ring, and the second I mentioned Allison's name, her tone shifted. She told me that a couple of months back she'd seen him and Allison together at a bar downtown. Not in a group, not running into each other by chance, but sitting in a corner booth alone, talking like they had all the time in the world. When Kayla asked him about it the next day, he brushed it off, said she was just catching him up on her life. At the time, Kayla let it slide because I'd never mentioned them talking, and she assumed I knew. Now she realized I didn't. Then she dropped the real bomb. Apparently, Allison had been through at least 2 breakups in the past year, and every single time my boyfriend's name would somehow pop up in her social media posts. Vague captions about people who really understand me, or those who show up when it matters. Kayla had even spotted his hoodie in one of her stories months ago, though she couldn't be 100% sure it was his until I mentioned what I'd seen last night. My stomach twisted. This wasn't some sudden rescue I'd been roped into. This was months of contact, building up to her moving into my house without so much as a warning. By the time I pulled back into the driveway, my hands were not from fear, but from the slow burn of rage that had been building since the night. When I walked in, he was sitting at the table eating pancakes like they were on some cozy vacation. They both looked up at me, smiling, like this was all perfectly normal. That was the moment I realized something. I could yell, I could cry, I could even throw them both out right then and there, but I wanted more than that. I wanted the truth, every ugly piece of it, and to get it, I'd need to play along, at least for now. I forced a smile and sat down across from them, acting like nothing was wrong. My hands itched to shove the plate of pancakes off the table, but instead I asked about their day. He seemed relieved, like my sudden calmness meant I'd gotten over it. She kept stealing little glances at him, the kind of looks people give when they're in on something together. I nodded along to their chatter, pretending to be interested, while my brain was mapping out my next move. I needed proof, something undeniable, something that couldn't be explained away with, "You're overreacting." While he left to take a shower, I offered to help her clean up breakfast. She was surprisingly chatty when he wasn't around, going on about how nice he'd been to her and how she couldn't believe I was okay with her staying here. She said it with this fake little laugh, like she was fishing for me to admit I wasn't. I didn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I asked casual questions. When they'd last seen each other moved in, how often they'd been talking, whether she planned to stick around long. She answered quickly at first, but then she started tripping over her words. She mentioned inside jokes, places they'd gone together, that didn't match the timeline he'd given me. I kept my face neutral, but inside I was piecing it together. They hadn't reconnected a few weeks ago. This had been months. Later that afternoon, I waited until they were both out in the backyard before slipping into the guest room. I didn't even know exactly what I was looking for, just something. Her bag was on the floor, half unzipped. Right on top was a folded hoodie I recognized immediately, not just his, but the one I'd given him last year. Underneath, there were toiletries, a stack of mail addressed to her before she supposedly lost her apartment, and a small Polaroid photo of the two of them together at that same bar Kayla had mentioned. His arm was around her. He was smiling in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in months. I took a picture of the Polaroid on my phone, my hands trembling. That was my proof, and looking at it, something inside me snapped. I wasn't just going to confront him. I was going to make sure he understood exactly what it felt like to be blindsided in your own home. That night, I stayed quiet. He came to bed like nothing was wrong, scrolling on his phone while I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying the Polaroid in my head. I could have confronted him right then, but I didn't want an argument that would give him time to twist the story. I wanted him off balance, caught the way I'd been caught, without warning. The next day, I started setting the stage. I texted Kayla and 2 other close friends, telling them I needed them over for a little get-together. I didn't give details, just said it was important. I also invited my brother, who has never liked my boyfriend and wouldn't hesitate to step in if things got heated. While he was out running errands, I went through the guest room again. This time I looked deeper. Her phone charger plugged into the wall, 2 mugs on the nightstand, and one of his t-shirts folded neatly on the chair. It was clear she wasn't just staying here temporarily, she was nesting. By mid-afternoon, I had everything in place. I ordered pizza, stocked the fridge with drinks, made it look like a normal, casual hangout. When my friends arrived, I filled them in privately, showing them the photo I'd taken of the Polaroid. The reaction was unanimous: disgust, outrage, and a lot of, "You've got to be kidding me." Around 6 p.m., he came home with her in tow. They both froze a little at the sight of everyone in the living room, but I smiled like it was nothing and told them to join us. He looked suspicious, but she seemed eager, like she thought she'd just been invited deeper into my life. We all sat around eating and talking, but I could feel the tension humming under the surface. Every time he reached for her plate to pass something, my friends exchanged looks. Every time she laughed at something he said, I could see my brother's jaw tighten. Finally, when the timing felt right, I stood up and said I had something to share. I walked over to the coffee table, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen. The Polaroid appeared, bright and undeniable. Her face dropped instantly, his went pale, and for the first time since this whole mess began, the room was silent, everyone waiting to see what I'd say next. I let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. The only sound was the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. He looked like he was about to say something, but I held up my hand, keeping my eyes on him. I told everyone in the room exactly what the picture was. A Polaroid I found in the guest room. I explained how it matched the night Kayla had seen them together at the bar months ago, even though he'd sworn to me they hadn't spoken in years. I laid out the whole timeline, from the coincidental meeting he claimed happened weeks ago, to the moment she walked through my front door wearing his hoodie. Kayla confirmed her side of the story. My brother asked point blank if they'd been seeing each other. She looked down at her, fiddling with her sleeves, but he didn't even. He just sat there, jaw tight, eyes darting between me and the photo like he was When I asked him why he'd lied, why he thought it was okay to let her live here and talking to he finally, and what came out made the room he said he didn't see the point as he knew that she needed was just being. According to him, it wasn't about the past between them, it was about helping someone where else to go. Kayla actually laughed out. She pointed out that Allison's social media from just last month showed her at her sister's, clearly with place to stay. Allison's face went red and she snapped at Kayla to mind her own business. That's when my brother spoke up, his voice low and sharp, asking my boyfriend if he'd been sleeping with her. The pause before he answered was all anyone needed to know. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just told them both to get out. But instead of leaving, she crossed her arms and smirked, like she'd been waiting for this moment. And then she said something that made my stomach flip and my friends sit forward in their seats. She claimed they'd been together the whole time. Not recently, not just reconnecting, but for months. Long before she moved in. And then, just to twist the knife, she added one more detail. She said he told her he'd been planning to leave me. He just hadn't figured out how to do it without looking like the bad guy. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Nobody moved. My friends looked at me, waiting for me to explode, but I stayed frozen in my spot, hands gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles ached. He immediately tried to backpedal, saying she was just being dramatic and trying to make things worse. But the damage was done. I'd seen the way he didn't look surprised, like he'd just been exposed, not falsely accused. I asked him point blank if it was true. He didn't answer. His silence was my answer. That was when my brother stood up, towering over both of them, and told them they needed to pack their things and leave immediately. My boyfriend's voice cracked when he told my brother it wasn't his house, but my brother just looked at me and asked if I wanted them gone. I said yes, louder than I expected. Allison didn't pretend to be upset. She smiled, actually smiled, and said she'd be out in the morning. I told her no, she'd be out now. She rolled her eyes, muttered something under her breath, and went to the guest room. He followed her, muttering to himself about how I was making a scene. The next 20 minutes were a blur. Slamming drawers, the front door opening and closing, and the low rumble of my brother's voice, making sure they didn't try anything on their way out. When the door finally shut for the last time, the silence was deafening. I stood there in the middle of the living room, surrounded by friends, and felt this weird mix of relief and devastation. Relief that it was over. Devastation that it had ever happened at all. But before I could even process what I was feeling, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from a brand new Instagram account. The username was unmistakably hers. The picture she'd posted made my chest tighten. It was her in the passenger seat of his truck, grinning at the camera, with a caption that read, "Finally where I belong," and the timestamp, not even an hour after they'd left my house. I stared at the post for a solid minute, my thumb hovering over the screen. Every instinct in me wanted to comment, to call her out in front of everyone, to let the world know exactly how she'd ended up, where she belonged. But the more I looked at that smug smile, the more I realized she wanted a reaction. She wanted me to lose it publicly, so she could play the victim, so I didn't give her one. I screenshotted it, sent it to Kayla and my brother for the record, and then blocked the account. Out of sight, out of her twisted little game. The rest of that night was a haze. My friends stayed until late, making sure I wasn't alone. We ate the leftover pizza, laughed awkwardly, tried to make the room feel less heavy, but every so often my mind would flick back to the fact that, only 48 hours ago, I'd been sharing a bed with a man who'd been planning my exit behind my back. The next morning, I started clearing the house of him. His clothes, his tools, every last reminder went into boxes. My brother came by to haul them to storage until I decided what to do with them. The guest room got a deep clean, new sheets, furniture rearranged, every trace of her gone. By afternoon, I'd spoken to a lawyer. I wanted my name off anything we shared, bills, leases, accounts. I wasn't about to let him drag me into debt or drama while he played happy couple with her. Over the next few days, I kept hearing about their little online parade, photos of them at bars, him wearing shirts I'd bought, her posting cryptic captions about finally choosing happiness. Every time one popped up in a group chat, I'd just delete it without opening it. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was that I refused to give them any more of my energy. The real turning point came a week later, when Kayla sent me a screenshot of another post, this time from him. A blurry picture of the two of them in a diner at 2 a.m., captioned, "Sometimes you just know." Except the comments weren't what I expected. They were flooded with people calling them out, tagging me, telling him exactly what they thought of his grand love story. It seemed my silence had done more damage than any public blow-up could. It hit me then. He'd wanted to control how the story was told, to make it seem like we'd just grown apart, and he'd fallen in love with someone else. But he didn't get to write that ending. I did, and mine is simple. I lost a liar and gained a clean slate. No more second-guessing who's in my house, who's in my bed, or who's in my corner. They can keep each other, because I'm keeping my peace.